there is something you have been trying to force. Maybe it is a relationship that is not moving the way you want it to. Maybe it is a career that keeps hitting the same wall no matter how hard you push. Maybe it is an internal state, trying to force yourself to feel confident, to feel ready, to feel at peace, and finding that the harder you try, the further away it gets. You already know the feeling. The specific exhaustion of fighting something that will not move. The frustration of doing everything right and still not getting the result. The quiet suspicion, arriving late at night, that maybe the problem is not the obstacle. Maybe the problem is the forcing itself. Carl Jung spent 50 years studying this exact dynamic. Why human beings exhaust themselves trying to control what cannot be controlled. Why force so often produces the opposite of what was intended. And what a different approach, one rooted in the nature of the unconscious mind, actually looks like. This is not a video about giving up. It is about something far more sophisticated than either forcing or giving up. Let's begin. First, who was Carl Jung and why does this matter? Carl Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst who lived from 1875 to 1961. He was initially a close collaborator of Sigmund Freud, and then broke from him to develop one of the most comprehensive and influential theories of the human psyche ever produced. Where Freud focused primarily on repressed desires and childhood trauma, Jung went deeper. He studied mythology, alchemy, Eastern philosophy, and the dreams of thousands of patients across decades of clinical practice. He was trying to understand not just what was wrong with people, but what the human psyche was fundamentally trying to do. His conclusion was this: the unconscious mind is not your enemy. It is not a repository of repressed problems. It is an active, intelligent system, one with its own wisdom, its own timing, and its own direction. And when you force your conscious will against its direction, you create the exact resistance and exhaustion you are currently experiencing. Understanding this changes everything about how you approach the areas of your life that feel stuck, why forcing never works, the psychology behind it. When you force something, you are operating from the assumption that your conscious mind knows what is needed, when it is needed, and how it should arrive. You are treating the situation as a mechanical problem. Apply sufficient force in the correct direction and the desired result will appear. But human beings are not mechanical systems, and the deeper processes that govern relationships, creativity, growth, and meaning operate by a completely different logic. Jung wrote that the greatest and most important problems of life are fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, only outgrown. Read that again. Not solved. Outgrown. The problem that feels impossible right now is not waiting for you to find the right solution. It is waiting for you to become someone who no longer experiences it as a problem. That transformation, that growth, cannot be forced. It can only be cultivated. And cultivation requires a completely different orientation than force. The unconscious mind and what it actually wants. Here is the part that most people miss about Jung's psychology. The unconscious is not passive. It is not simply the place where you store things you do not want to think about. It is active. It is working constantly, processing your experiences, generating dreams, producing intuitions, sending signals through emotional responses that your conscious mind did not choose and cannot fully explain. Jung called this process individuation, the lifelong movement toward becoming more fully and authentically yourself, not the self that was shaped by other people's expectations, not the self that was constructed as a defense against the world, the actual self, the one that has always been there underneath the performance. Individuation cannot be forced because you cannot force yourself to be more authentic. Every act of force in that direction produces greater performance, the performance of being authentic, which is its own form of inauthenticity. What allows individuation to proceed is not effort. It is attention, honest observation of what is actually moving in you, in your dreams, in your emotional responses, in the things that consistently attract or repel you, and a willingness to follow that movement even when it leads somewhere your conscious plans did not include. Synchronicity. What happens when you stop forcing? Jung developed a concept he called synchronicity, the phenomenon of meaningful coincidences. Events in the external world that align with internal psychological states in ways that cannot be explained by causality alone. Most people have experienced this without having a name for it. You stop obsessing over a problem, and the answer arrives. You release your grip on a situation, and it begins to move. You give up trying to force a particular outcome, and something better than what you were forcing toward appears. Jung was not making a mystical claim. He was making a psychological one. When the conscious mind releases its grip, when it stops drowning out every other signal with the noise of its own agenda, the unconscious has room to communicate. And the unconscious, with its access to information and patterns that the conscious mind cannot directly perceive, often guides you toward what is actually needed rather than what you have decided you want. This is why the moment of release, the moment you genuinely stop forcing, so often produces movement. Not because some external force has been waiting to help you, because you have finally gotten out of your own way. The shadow, what you are really fighting. Here is where Jung gets uncomfortable, and where the most important insight lives. Jung identified a concept he called the shadow, the parts of yourself that you have rejected, suppressed, or refused to acknowledge. The aspects of your character that do not fit the image you have constructed of who you are. Here is the critical insight. The things you force most compulsively in your external life often reflect something you are refusing to face in your internal life. The person who forces control over every situation is often refusing to face their own vulnerability. The person who forces a particular relationship outcome is often refusing to face their own loneliness or fear of inadequacy. The person who forces themselves to feel positive is often refusing to face a genuine grief or dissatisfaction that deserves honest attention. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The forcing is not fixing the problem. The forcing is the avoidance of the problem. And the problem will continue to generate the same resistance until you are willing to look at it directly. The difference between surrender and collapse. At this point, someone always asks, but does this mean I should just do nothing? Stop trying? Accept whatever happens? No, that is collapse. Jung was not advocating passivity. The distinction he drew was between forcing, trying to impose your conscious will on a process that operates by a different logic, and participating consciously in your own development. Participating means, I take the actions that are actually available to me. I do the work that is genuinely mine to do, and I release my grip on the specific outcome, because my conscious mind does not have sufficient information to dictate exactly how this should resolve. A farmer participates in the harvest by preparing the soil, planting the seed, watering regularly. The farmer does not force the seed to grow. The farmer creates the conditions for growth, and then trusts the process. Your role in your own development is exactly this. Create the conditions. Do what is genuinely yours to do, and release the expectation that the outcome will match your predetermined plan. 3 signs you are forcing too hard right now. Sign 1. You are exhausted by something that should energize you. When you are aligned with what is genuinely yours to do, effort produces energy. When you are forcing against the grain of your actual nature, effort produces depletion. Sign 2. The harder you try, the more the situation resists. This is Jung's signal that the conscious approach is not working and a different orientation is needed. Sign 3. You have the same conversation with yourself about the same problem repeatedly, and nothing changes. This is the unconscious trying to tell you that the problem is not solvable at the level you are working on. Something in you needs to grow, not something outside you needs to change. What Jung said to do instead, pay attention to what is actually moving in you, not what you think should be moving. Notice your dreams. Notice your emotional responses to unexpected things. Notice what consistently fascinates you and what consistently drains you. These are not random signals. They are communication from a part of your mind that has access to patterns and wisdom your conscious reasoning cannot directly reach. Take one honest look at what you have been forcing. Ask, what am I afraid would happen if I stopped forcing this? The answer to that question is usually where the real work is. Then take one action. Not the one your plan demands, but the one that actually feels genuinely yours. Small, specific, not forced, and see what moves. Jung spent his entire career watching what happened when people stopped fighting their own depths and started listening to them instead. The consistent result was not passivity. It was aliveness. The specific quality of a person who has stopped performing their life and started actually living it. That is available to you, not through force, through honest attention to what is already moving. If this gave you something useful, subscribe. Philosophy and psychology every week. No motivation, no fluff, just what actually holds up.